You're listening to episode 163, Emma's Story, a daughter with Trisomy 18. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. Oh, I'm feeling myself get a little emotional. Hi, I'm Katie. If you haven't been here before, I should probably introduce myself. I am a child life specialist. We work with kids and families in the healthcare setting and help kids and families cope with different parts of their hospitalization and illness and diagnosis, and overall do our best to make families feel like families and kids feel like kids and siblings feel like siblings as they navigate the complexities of healthcare. Gosh, I'm so excited to share Emma with you today. She is in her mid-20s, the mom of two, but was really thrust into medical parenthood when she was young, just about 23. And she shares her story of her daughter who has the diagnosis of trisomy 18 and some medical complexities that are typically correlated with that. The reason I'm feeling a little bit choked up is it makes me think very fondly of this little boy I loved named Jack, who was born with trisomy 18 as well, to one of my good friends and nurses that I worked with. And being a part of Jack's story is one of the biggest blessings of my life. And so I just want to dedicate this episode to Jack and to Anna and to their entire family, Trevor, Walker, Lainey, all of you. Jack's impact on my life is immeasurable. I take him with me every day and every interaction with families and with my own, and just feel lucky to have known him. So this is dedicated to sweet Jack. And Emma, thank you for being on the podcast today to share your story about your smiley little girl, Sage. And I really hope that if anything you get out of this episode as you're listening today is that you have the right to choose your care team. And if you are told something that doesn't sit well, you can lean on other parents to help guide you to another direction. Another thing I want you to walk away with is the availability of people on social media. And Emma and I talk about this a little bit, like when people DM you, and specifically her, like people are DMing her with some pretty intense requests and questions, and the weight of that can wear on her. Yet we know, listening, that's not her responsibility to respond. And she does as much as she can to put things out there. So let's all just give each other a little grace if there's a lack of response or no response. We don't know what the other person is going through. And I bet if you have gone through their feed before, maybe they've answered it before, or they talk about it on a podcast like this. So those two things to walk away with today is that let's give each other grace on social media, and you get to choose your care team. Okay? Thanks, guys. I'm so glad you're here today. Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app.
It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners.
So, if you want to just begin by introducing yourself to our listeners here and telling us a little bit about you and your family. You're a Texas girl, so obviously I love that, being down here in Austin. And how are you doing? How is life for you right now?
I'm great. Yeah, like you said, we live in Texas as well. We're based in the Fort Worth area. My name's Emma Springer, and I am the mom of a 2.5-year-old with Edwards syndrome, or trisomy 18. And like you said, yeah, we are from Texas, and we live in the Fort Worth area. We love living in Texas. My husband and I are both born and bred Texas people. And we also have a younger daughter who just is about to turn 5 months old. So she's just 2 years younger than our daughter, and she is developmentally and genetically typical. So this is my first time kind of experiencing typical parenthood after, having medical parenthood first. And life is good, with my 2 little girls.
Oh, that's a whole other podcast, right? Is getting pregnant after
Right. Yes.
having a medically complex or chronically ill child. It's like, I'm sure they're just the worries, the anxieties, the fears, the joys, all of that is just so complex to think about.
Absolutely. It's a totally different experience, and in a lot of ways feels like I'm a first-time parent again.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people would relate to that. Well, walk us
hmm
back to the beginning, because I think your story really starts when you and your husband met and, right, kind of just got
Yeah.
married and all that good stuff. So take us back to the beginning.
Yeah. So my husband and I met when we were 18 years old. We met our first week on campus at college. We both started at Texas Tech University, and we both played college golf there. And after our sophomore year, my husband transferred to TCU in Fort Worth here, and he finished his eligibility playing golf there. And I, in the middle, after my fall semester, my junior year of college, moved back home to Houston, and I went to nursing school. So that was kind of the end of my golf career. And so I'm actually a nurse by profession. And so we got together, like I said, beginning of our freshman year of college, and graduated in 2019 and got married that August. And we were 22 years old. And my husband plays golf professionally, and so he was just getting his career started. And so we definitely did not have plans for a baby at that time, but our precious sage surprised us 5 months into marriage. And so we were younger than we expected, having our first little one, and kind of not where we planned to be in life at the time of having our first child. But we were excited. It was definitely not bad news. We were excited about being pregnant. And
It's like, oh, we're doing this. Here we go. Let's get started.
Exactly. We were like, okay, jumping in with 2 feet.
Nothing like graduating, getting married, and having a baby. Let's do it.
Right. Just one thing after the next, no downtime. So we decided to forego the genetic testing in the beginning of my pregnancy. Most people do it, between weeks like 10 and 13. And it's just like a blood draw. That's like a screen for some of the most common things, which trisomy 18 is actually included in that screening. And we decided to forego that because we got pregnant easily. We weren't even trying to get pregnant. We were both young. We had never had, any difficulties with pregnancies or anything. We didn't see ourselves as somebody that would be high risk. And so we just decided to forego it. And so went 20 weeks of my pregnancy without a clue that there was anything wrong. I would say I was kind of an anxious early pregnant person. But at the same time, this was early 2020. I found out I was pregnant January of 2020. So of course the world was falling apart around me, and I was working in a hospital as a nurse. And so there was a lot of anxiety about what does COVID mean for a pregnant person? And, you know, what does this mean for my baby? And, you know, all these things. So I think that really contributed to my anxiety. But some people would say that's like a mother's intuition, you know, that something was off or something. So yeah, went 20 weeks with no clue that anything was out of the ordinary. At our 20-week scan, so we found that Sage had a 2-vessel umbilical cord, and typically there would be 3 blood vessels in an umbilical cord, 2 arteries and a vein. So she just had 1 artery, 1 vein. And then she had some cysts on her brain, choroid plexus cysts, as well as well, I guess those were kind of our 2 main things. I don't know that they measured her. I mean, I'm sure they did measure her, but I don't really remember it being a huge thing that she was measuring small at that scan in particular. They actually told us at that scan that her heart looked fine, which is interesting looking back on. But anyways, they referred us to a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and so I went there about 2 weeks later, and they did their own ultrasound, and she was measuring at that time about in the 9th percentile, and they confirmed her 2-vessel cord. And at that time, her choroid plexus had already resolved, which typically they do resolve on their own. And so they had already resolved a couple of weeks later. And so they were kind of telling us, you know, these type of things in and of themselves can be not a big deal. They can happen in a typical pregnancy, that you have a small baby or a baby with a 2-vessel umbilical cord. But whenever we see them together, it kind of, this cluster of things kind of starts to paint a picture that there might be something else at play. And so we were kind of just trying to, as much as we could, not worry until there was something to worry about, you know, just go, okay, maybe this is just coincidences that we have these things, and she could be totally typical and just only have two vessels in her umbilical cord and things like that. But they did say at that scan that their words were kind of like, we can tell there's something wrong with her heart, but we can't tell exactly what. And so they made a referral for us to go see a pediatric cardiologist for a fetal echo. And at that appointment, they drew my blood for some screening things. So they drew the blood screen that they typically do in the first trimester of pregnancy. And then they also screened for some other things. I know I was screened for Fragile X, because it turns out I'm actually a carrier of Fragile X, which is a whole other conversation and not relevant to this baby or this pregnancy at all. But I am actually a carrier of Fragile X. So I know that they screen for that, but I don't know exactly what else was screened for. But so I go for a fetal echo, and actually as I was checking in for my echo, I get a call on the phone saying, you know, your blood testing came back high risk for trisomy 18, and somebody's going to call you in the next couple of hours to schedule an amniocentesis. And it wasn't even really a question of like, do you want to schedule an amniocentesis?
Right.
It was just like, we're going to do that. And so, you know, whenever you're in that state, me now, I'm a different person. I'm more, okay, let me think about this. Let me make decisions. Let me ask questions, you know, but at the time, so inexperienced, you don't even know what question to ask. You don't know what you don't know, you know, like, you're just like, okay, that's next. And that was a really, really hard day.
I'm just thinking about you, like in this pandemic, pregnant for the first time. Are you having to go to these ultrasounds alone? I know sometimes that was a thing, like you're handling this all by yourself.
Yes. So for our dating scan, my very first ultrasound of pregnancy, that was in February. So that was right before the world shut down. And so my husband did get to go to that scan. After that, he wasn't allowed to any appointments with me at all, except for our anatomy scan. He got to be there for the scan itself, but then he had to leave the office whenever I went back to like the exam room, which is where they told me, you know, what was going on. So it didn't really make any difference that he was with me for the ultrasound, because I was totally alone whenever I was given this news that like, hey, we're concerned there's something wrong and you're going to have to go, you know, see this other person. And I really feel like, honestly, the trauma that I experienced during pregnancy, in large part, was being alone for all of it, and just having nobody but myself, to think of questions to ask in the moment. Because then, of course, there's this ripple that once you leave an appointment, once something is wrong, everybody wants to know how every appointment goes. And you're the only one that was there. And so you have to call your parents and tell them, and call your in-laws and tell them, and call your husband and tell them, and call your, all these different people. And you're reliving the experience over and over and over again. And so finally, whenever we got a little bit further along, I'd go over to my in-laws' house with my husband and get my parents on the phone. And I'd be like, I'm saying this one time and one time only. And if anybody forgets, you can ask each other. Yeah. I'd be like, I'm not going to sit here and say this over and over again, because I'd get emotional every time talking about it. And it was just a lot to have to retell and retell and retell, because I'm the only one there.
Well, and it's hard to even retain something when you're overwhelmed, you're upset, you're anxious, you're hearing it for the first time, words you've never heard before. Maybe you had because of nursing school, but still in the context of you being the patient and then there being a baby too, I'm sure it's easy to forget what was told you or to need clarification. And when that other person's in the room with you, you can be like, did you hear that too? And what was said and what actually happened.
Right. And, to your point, like, I had never even been a patient before. I mean, I was 23 years old. I had been pretty healthy through my whole life. So the only appointments I had ever been to was my pediatrician visits, and maybe to see a sports trainer for a physical once a year. Yeah. And I think I had been to the OBGYN like once or twice before getting pregnant. Yeah. Just for like, I don't know, I think I got a pap smear starting at like 21. I don't know. Right. But like, I had never been a patient before. So to not only like really be on the patient side of things for the first time ever, but it to be like a kind of rigorous experience of being a patient, it was definitely eye-opening for me in many, many ways.
And just going back to the fetal echo, and you were alone. Like, I can only imagine, like, you're checking in, you get a call, you're like, hey, you at the office, hold on, I've got to take this call that I've been waiting for. I'm alone going through all of this.
Absolutely. That was actually one of my hardest days of my life to date. I mean, we've been through many, many hard things since then. But that was like the first day of my pregnancy that I was truly distraught. I mean, getting that call and then being there. And my husband was actually out of town, because like I said, he plays golf professionally. So there's a lot of travel involved. And even in 2020, I don't even remember what he was out of town for or what event he was at or whatever, but he wasn't in town. Because it wouldn't have made a difference. Even if he was in town, he couldn't come to the appointment with me. Right. So it was like, yeah, you may as well go. You can't come anyways. And so, to get that call, and I just remember being incredibly emotional through the whole echo. They were asking me, well, what do you want on the TV to watch while I do this? And I was like, I don't care. You can turn it off. Like, I'm not going to sit here and watch TV. My brain is somewhere else. And then, being taken into a consultation room and then, listing out all these defects with her heart and telling me at that appointment, this baby will need surgery before she will ever be able to leave the hospital. Getting that news as a young, naive, first-time mom, no experience in this world whatsoever. I mean, it was devastating. And then to go home alone, my sweet mother-in-law and sister-in-law, brought me dinner that night. And actually sent me dinner that night, DoorDashed me dinner.
Because everybody's terrified that we're going to get COVID. Right. And oh my gosh.
Yes. So
Emma, as far as like hard days go, it makes a lot of sense that was one of the hardest.
Yes. And I was just not at all prepared to experience that. Now I think I've kind of built up this resiliency because you've been through so many things that it's like getting bad news. You're like, okay, let me sit with this. Let me process this. There's just a greater resilience to it or just, be getting used to it. But I had never been through something like that before and was not at all prepared. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, going through that for the first time. And that's why I say, even though arguably some of the things we've been through since then were harder, that experience affected me emotionally, probably one of the most of anything we've experienced.
That's a really good point to make, especially as like providers and clinicians and nurses see families in the hospital, to really be like, we have no idea what they've had happen up until this point. And in some cases, it's like built resiliency in them. And maybe that's why they're responding emotionally or not emotionally in one way. There's a whole backstory when kids and families come in the hospital, and it starts from before they're even born, to your point. It starts from the 20-week ultrasound, the day they found out they were pregnant, the years they took for fertility treatments. You just never know what a family is going through. But you really accurately and articulately state that it was hard, and it has, molded what the rest of your experience has been like, probably for good and for bad. And I want to go to the diagnosis of trisomy 18, because as you are now an advocate for that, what did you know about it? And when you went home, I'm sure you Googled, as they tell us not to do, but there's really nothing else to do. How did you handle learning about it? And so what were those days and moments like when it started to sink in, trisomy 18?
Yeah. So as a nursing student, actually, and as a person of faith, I look back and see these as like God winks and God kind of preparing my heart before I even knew it. But as a nursing student, actually, I had an experience during my pediatric clinical rotations, which our pediatric clinical rotations were pretty limited. Like I only had like 4 full shifts in a pediatric setting. And on one of those shifts, we took care of a patient with trisomy 18, which now I look back and I'm like, what are the odds that would happen? But we had a patient with trisomy 18, and the nurse that was precepting me had never heard of trisomy 18. And together we sat down and Googled trisomy 18. And I don't even remember exactly what we read about it, but I remember us kind of looking at each other and going, oh, this is rough. This is bad. Like I remember feeling that way. Like I don't remember exactly what it was that we read or things like that, but I remember having that feeling. And so whenever trisomy 18, I remember after my first anatomy scan, Googling choroid plexus cyst. And if you Google choroid plexus cyst, one of the first things that's going to come up is trisomy 18, because even though they typically resolve on their own, a large portion of pregnancies with trisomy 18 will have choroid plexus cyst at some point. And so they're definitely correlated with each other. And so I already knew that was part of the equation, that was one of the things we were going to be ruling out from the time that she had choroid plexus cyst. And so I was kind of bracing for impact that could be what this was. And I remember calling my mom after that anatomy scan and telling her about choroid plexus cyst, and telling her that when I Googled it, trisomy 18 came up, and telling her that I had this patient. And I remember using the phrase, if that's what she has, it's incompatible with life. Which makes me emotional saying that now, that was what I said to my mom, because now that is a phrase that like we so want just absolutely rid from anybody's vocabulary, referring to trisomy 18. But that was what I thought, and because that's what I knew. And so, so that was my first exposure to trisomy 18, is, that it's incompatible with life, and that, if this is this diagnosis, like, we will not be raising this child. And that was really, really hard. Like I said, especially to have to convey to your family members, because just from that little exposure and experience that I had, which it's crazy to me actually to think back, because the patient that we took care of, she was actually over a year old. And I remember me and the nurse kind of being like, I mean, she looks pretty good, all things considered, based on what we're Googling. This kid looks pretty good. And again, that's kind of a God wink, a little bit to me.
Well, it's like
I
these
wish
little
that,
slivers that
yes,
make their way. And when you're only in the sliver, you think it's the whole picture. But the
yes,
more information you get, you realize there's more out there. That goes with so much in life. But and, you're having to tell your mom and bearing the weight of, her sadness and her grief.
yes. I just wish that I had realized that the information, or what I thought I knew about trisomy 18, was one very, very small piece of the picture that is their life expectancy. And I put life expectancy in quotes because at this point in time, there's really no for sure expectation, because the landscape of care is changing so rapidly, which means that the life expectancy is changing rapidly to the point where right now there's not even really a way that we can put a number on this is what her life expectancy is.
And also the spectrum of severity of,
Right.
the different combination of things that can happen can be such, a large spectrum as well. And
Right.
what's exciting though is to hear the hope in your voice about the changing landscape for care, which is really
Yes.
exciting for me, who's been in peds for 12 years, right? So
Yes.
12 years ago was different than it is today. And that's exciting
Absolutely.
and hopeful to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's kind of been these long-standing statistics for, years and years and years that, people would say about 10% live to be a year old. And that is kind of what has been widely accepted. But also what's been widely accepted is doing little to no medical support or care for babies with trisomy 18. And so that is the life expectancy with no intervention. And there are these different studies kind of cropping up, not enough yet. We're hoping to see more in the coming years. But a couple in particular, one on trisomy 18 regarding cardiac intervention, because cardiac defects affect like 80 to 90% of pregnancies, babies born with trisomy 18. And this study found, following these like hundreds of kids with trisomy 18, of those that received some sort of cardiac intervention, it combined both palliative and a full corrective repair, that of those that received some sort of intervention, the median length of life from time of hospital discharge was 16.2 years.
Wow.
And so, that kind of goes to show that when the correct medical care is provided, they stand to live much longer. And like you said, there's a whole slew of combinations. They're medically complex, which means they could have neurological things going on, respiratory things going on, cardiac things going on, all these different things. And so each one's going to play their own part in the expectancy. And especially depending on how each thing is treated. Is it treated in a full corrective way, or is it treated palliatively? All of those things are going to affect possibly how long, they live. And that's why I put life expectancy in quotes, because for a kid like Sage, who she has a tracheostomy and she's had a full heart repair, but she does have pulmonary hypertension, and it is at times worse, like more exacerbated, and at times it's pretty well controlled. And so that's also going to play into her life expectancy. And I can't say with a kid that has had these life-saving measures but has pulmonary hypertension that could be better controlled, what her life expectancy is, which is sometimes it's a good thing, because it reminds us to live very much for now, because we still feel like we don't know how long her life will be. But it also gives me a really strong sense of hope that I will see her into her teen years and even possibly adult years. So it lifts a lot of doom and gloom off of the diagnosis, whenever you see studies validating that with X, Y, and Z intervention, the median length of life was 16.2 years. And that's combining corrective and palliative interventions. And so those things give us a lot of hope. That's like with changing landscape of care is a changing landscape of life expectancy as well, and also quality of life. Because for a long time, it's been said that, we're not going to do anything because these kids are just going to die anyways, and we're just going to prolong their suffering. They're just going to be suffering. And so that's a reason a lot of times that people are persuaded to or do choose hospice or comfort care. And our personal experience, and I know this is not the case for everybody, and obviously every child is different in regards to the obstacles and anomalies that affect them. But in our personal situation, we've never seen our daughter suffer more than during the time that she was on comfort measures in hospice, because she was struggling so much to breathe, and she was so basically malnourished. She was so tiny and skinny, and it was incredibly difficult to see her like that. And once she had the respiratory support that she needed, she was truly like she had been born again, like she was a whole new child.
We'll be right back.
Have you ever wanted to sit down with your child or one of your patients and just have a really impactful play session, but you don't have the bandwidth to go get every single piece of everything that you need, or you're in a rush and you don't want to spend that time gathering materials because, it's just exhausting, honestly, sometimes to have to think about exactly what to put together. When I finally got my hands on a sensory play kit from Present Not Perfect, I was obsessed because I could just sit down with my child, not have to do any prep work, but have an impactful and meaningful play session with them. Created by a teacher and a therapist, these sensory play kits foster early emotional literacy skills through the power of playful metaphor. But honestly, my son and I, we just sat down, we had a great time of connection. We actually ended up talking about some of the issues that he was having without me having to start or provoke the conversation. It just happened really naturally. You can get 10% off your order with the code CHILDLIFE10 when you go to presentnotperfectllc.com. You can also find and shop on Instagram at present_notperfect_. Again, that's presentnotperfectllc.com with code CHILDLIFE10.
Oh, that's such good perspective to hear, I think.
Yeah.
And wow, I imagine that, and I know that you spend a lot of your time advocating for kind of this change of thinking in the medical community. What has it been like connecting with other parents? And, part of getting through any kind of difficulty with having your child be sick or have a life-threatening illness or surgery is knowing what other people have gone through. And have you gotten strength from other community members? And tell me a little bit about those that you're able to connect with to help you as mom.
Yeah, other parents have truly been like one of the biggest, like most fulfilling parts of raising a child with trisomy 18. Like I've developed so many close friendships and a bond with other people that I wouldn't exist if I didn't have a child with trisomy 18. And that is with other people who have kids with trisomy 18, but as well as other diagnoses who they also have a child with a trach, for example. Like they may not have trisomy 18, but we both have this commonality of raising a child with a tracheostomy. And that, those relationships, like I can relate to them like no one else. And a lot of times, I have other people that I've been friends with prior to Sage's diagnosis in my pregnancy with her and her life. And, they also have children around the same age. And at times it feels like it's affected our relationship, not necessarily negatively, but we're experiencing two very different experiences of motherhood. And to the point where it's almost hard to relate. Like, it's hard to even connect almost as friends anymore. And I hope that doesn't discourage some people.
No. We welcome that. We welcome that honesty.
It's real. Like, a couple people that I was pregnant at the same time as them, but I was carrying Sage and they were carrying typical children. Their kids are now, walking and talking and, eating at the dinner table with them and all of these things that typical 2.5-year-olds do. And they're, taking them to amusement parks and, doing all these things that is not my experience of motherhood. And I love that for them, and I'm happy for them that that's their experience, but that's not my experience, and my experience is not their experience. And so there's almost a very small amount to relate to. They're talking about potty training, and I don't know if that will ever be a conversation that we have, and so it's just all this. Whenever you're a mom, especially a first-time mom, I think it's kind of what do they say? Like, it's kind of a I guess an ongoing joke. It's like it becomes your whole personality.
Right.
Like that becomes pretty much all that there, not all that there is to you, but it's what you talk about, what you think about,
Right.
it affects
Sure.
your sleep, it affects what you eat, all those things. And so whenever you're both experiencing that, where motherhood's kind of all consuming and your experience of motherhood's so different, there's not a lot of stuff to connect on anymore. And so there's that. But back to, the question about connecting to other parents that are also raising kids with Edwards syndrome or with similar medical needs to Sage. Those friendships have been so deep and fulfilling to me, because, like I mentioned, my walk with my faith, I've had deeper and more honest, more convicting conversations about my faith with other parents raising kids with medically complex kids than any other, conversations and relationships in my life. And that's been really, really fulfilling. And not to mention that because the landscape is changing so much in trisomy 18, based on what I was getting from my doctors only, had I not connected with other parents, Sage probably would not still be here today. It was seeing other people that had raised their children and fought for their lives and traveled to get them the care that they needed, and them giving me the names of hospitals and doctors and things that would offer these interventions. That is how I got in touch with those places and ended up taking Sage. We live in Fort Worth, and we took her to Austin, to Dell Children's. And another couple of moms that I knew, their kids had gotten care there because either they lived in close proximity to Austin or just in Texas. And they sent me the contact info of, the nurse coordinator for their cardiac program and said, call this person, ask about this. And I did that. And about 4 weeks later, we were sitting in a meeting for her to have a surgical evaluation and planning her heart surgery. And
that's amazing.
That is because of the connection with other parents. And, much is made of social media and people saying, people don't connect anymore because we're all on our phones and stuff like that. But for communities like mine, without social media, there's so many people that I never would have connected with. And we are able to make so much progress in our diagnosis community because parents are empowered by being able to connect to each other. And I always think about Down syndrome, which is the first most common trisomy. So you have Down syndrome, which is trisomy 21, Edwards syndrome, which is trisomy 18, and Patau syndrome, which is trisomy 13. Those are the three most common trisomies. Down syndrome, if you think about how doctors approached Down syndrome 50 or 75 years ago, it is night and day different to the approach
right.
now.
Right.
And Edwards syndrome was discovered about 100 years after Down syndrome. And so theoretically, we're about 100 years behind them. But my hope is that with social media, that 100 years is not going to take 100 years, because we are able to connect to each other and make a movement a lot stronger and a lot faster than they were able to back in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
I think there's no doubt, like with
Yeah.
you being one of the leaders here on the charge, like I'm just listening to you speak. And man, I meet a lot of badass moms on this podcast, and badass dads who are changing the landscape of care for their kids, whether that's a new treatment or a new cure or a new way of looking at something. And you for sure are up there. And have you, there are dark times in the beginnings, and one of them you wrote to me, and you talked about like you would count down the hours until you could be in a safe space to break down again. And I think that's important to bring up. But listening to you, do you ever stop and think, I'm changing care for my child and for kids that come next? And because of what you've done, because of the advocate that you've become, and that you're able to handle so much, I hope you what I'm trying to say is I hope you look in the mirror and go, wow, I'm really proud of myself.
I am proud of myself. And I do know that every time I share part of our story, or I share a picture of Sage, or I talk about what's going on in her life, what she's able to achieve, or anything, I know that has the potential to reach even one person that might second guess, oh, I have been told that there's no living person with trisomy 18, which I met a mom just last year who lives in the DSW Metroplex, who was told by their maternal fetal medicine doctor that there's no living person with trisomy 18, which is just, like, you can Google it and that's false. And so I know that every message that I send to somebody writing to me that they are pregnant, or every person, that I talk to, that it has the power to potentially make a difference in that child's outcome, which is an incredibly impactful and humbling feeling, but also it's scary. And it is, there's a lot of weight that comes with that, and kind of feeling like whenever you get these messages, on social media, especially whenever a person says, this is what I'm being told and this is where I am and all that stuff, there's a lot of pressure to feel like I have information that could possibly make a difference to this child's outcome. And so I feel this sense of urgency that I need to drop everything and respond to this person. But I have a family of my own, and I work full time, and I'm running a nonprofit, and I'm doing all these things, and I can't be a slave to my Instagram direct messages and have to respond fully to every single one. And so there is a weight with that is hard. And so it's why I always try to encourage people, share your stories, and why I try to post so much of ours on social media, because I know that I can't respond to every person directly, but if they can glean some information off of what, just I'm posting, or if it gives them the courage to say, look, you're telling me that these kids can't live past a year, but on my phone right here, I can show you a 2.5-year-old that is, learning to stand and, sitting up and, all of these things. You're telling me that this child will never smile, will never interact with me, and will be I'm putting this in quotes, vegetable. I hate that word. It should also be forbidden from anybody's language ever. It's incredibly offensive.
It should be. It's like what you're getting at is like this, you have this balance now, And I think, gosh, your recognition of these boundaries are so important, because you're only as good as much as you take care of yourself. And being a slave to Instagram DMs, I don't care who you are, whether you're the president or a kindergarten teacher or a executive director of a nonprofit, it is not your responsibility, or myself for that matter. I get a lot of questions too. But we do put out information on our time with our boundaries and things that feel good to us. And that's why we're doing it. And no, I couldn't agree more. And one of the last questions I want to ask you is, I have two more. One is, you talked a lot about the quality of life for Sage, and I would just love to hear what kind of kiddo she is. Like, what makes her smile? What makes her laugh? What makes her Sage?
Sage is, first of all, I am not exaggerating when I say she is like the happiest kid you could ever meet. Mm-hmm. She is such a people person. She has toys that she likes. She really likes things that light up. Her hearing is not the best. And so visual things she loves. She will lock on to toys that light up, or if you have a projector on the ceiling, things like that. She loves that. But what she loves more than any toy is people. She loves to just sit face to face with you and look you in your eyes, and she'll just bust into a smile just looking at you. Oh. She loves to reach and touch your face. She loves to sit there and she'll just kind of pat your arm or pat your leg and smile at you. She is an adrenaline junkie. She loves to be thrown in the air. She will sit there and let you dip her backwards and sit her up. I mean, for hours, she could go on doing that. Again. She'll throw herself backwards. You've got to make sure that the way is clear behind her, that she's not going to conk her head on something, because she'll throw herself backwards. If we hit a dip in the car, where you might feel your belly drop.
Yeah.
You can see, and we have a little like car video monitor. You can see her just like bust into a smile. Those little adrenaline things, she lives for that.
Oh my gosh.
Stuff. So we're like, hopefully one day we can take her on a roller coaster or something, because she loves that. My father-in-law is a pilot, and he keeps saying he's going to take her up in a plane and do loop-de-loops.
Oh my gosh.
He would love it.
So fun.
She has the most infectious smile. I mean, it's almost impossible to look at a picture of her smiling and not smile yourself. She just is the happiest, most joyful child I've ever seen. And, like you said, quality of life is a huge conversation, and I will never downplay what she's been through in her life. She's experienced open heart surgery. Her chest was open for 4 days after that, and then had to have her chest closed. She had surgery to have her trach placed. She's had a few hospitalizations for, the common cold, basically. And I will never downplay that those things have been incredibly hard on her. But for us, we have made a commitment from her birth that we were always going to follow her lead, and we were always going to let her decide her path. We were not going to be her limiting factor. And she pushed through all those things. And, we don't have time to go into everything, but like I said, starting off her life, she was on hospice, and she pushed through that. And so we knew that she wanted to be here, and when she's healthy, she is the happiest kid I've ever met in my life. And she's never given us any indication that the combined amount of time that she's spent hospitalized has been about 3.5 months. Total, maybe close to 4 months of her life. And on the 1st of next month, she'll be 2.5 years old, so 30 months old. And so, that's around what is that, like a tenth of her life, 15% of her life or something. And she has always made it clear that she's only going to be held down for a little bit of time. She's only going to be acting sad and upset for just a few days. And even if she's still on oxygen and things like that and needing to be in the hospital, every nurse or RT in the hospital will tell you everybody wants to be taking care of Sage, because she is smiley, she is cute, she's kicking her legs, she's waving her hands in the air. she's just always indicated to us that the quality of her life is worth some hard times. And we will always let her lead the way. And if we ever feel like that's not the case, then we will reevaluate.
Yeah.
But she has made it clear that this is her story she's writing, and we are not to, make any decision otherwise for her at this period of time, because she loves her life and her people too much for us to let off the gas anytime soon.
I love that. And I can attest to the smiling when you see a picture of Sage, because it definitely happens to me.
Yeah.
My last question, before you tell us about where people can find you and your organization, is what have you learned about yourself since becoming Sage's mom that maybe you didn't know before?
Yeah. Like I said, I was kind of a young mom. I was 23 when I had her, although our birthdays are only a week apart. So I was 24 just the next week. But still, compared to kind of the average age of having your first child, I was definitely on the young side. And I have been very blessed and very fortunate in my life that as a child, as a teenager, and through college, I didn't really experience any challenging to my core moments, up until having Sage. And as a result of that, I was just not very tough. I mean, just to put it plainly, I was just not very tough. And having Sage, I used to be so scared of confrontation, so scared of saying what I was thinking, or even asking challenging questions. I was so scared to say anything that could be perceived as controversial, but in order to be a good advocate, you have to be willing to ruffle some feathers. And from having her, like I said, whenever I talked about, getting the information back then and how I was such a different person then, right. Whenever somebody said back then, okay, the next step's an amniocentesis, it was just, okay, when do I do that? And now I'd be saying, okay, well, what are we going to gain from that? What are the risks to that? What are, and I would not confrontational or challenging in a way that, is combative or aggressive, but I'm having these thoughts in my head and I'm not afraid to say them anymore. And I'm not afraid I'm not afraid of how you're going to feel if I stand up for myself. I'm not afraid of how you're going to feel if I stand up for my child. And before, it was like other people's feelings were always going to trump mine. Yeah. And so I've toughened up a lot since then, for better or worse. And in some ways, I think some of that resilience has made it to where sometimes I compartmentalize so much, and things that used to would, move me to emotion, I don't anymore, or I don't even just allow myself to go there, because I could sit around crying all day, every day. There's so much in my life that I have to be grateful for or grieving over, or,
right. Somewhere in the middle
that are so emotionally charged,
right.
That I could sit around and cry all day over my gratitude, over my grief and all these things. But I don't want to. I've cried myself out during my pregnancy, and so I don't want to do that. And so, sometimes that means, not fully feeling things, but overall, I just think I'm so much more confident in who I am. I'm confident in myself as a mom, which I've learned to be that way over the course of my motherhood of her. And it's also, I truly, before Sage, did not know anybody personally that had disabilities the way she does. In my experience of school growing up, a lot of the kids that may be in an alternative learning classroom, there was not a lot of inclusion time. So I wasn't really going to school and having kids with Down syndrome in my classroom, or things like that. And so, I had such little exposure to people with developmental delays or medical complexities in the way Sage has them. And that's not to say that people didn't have disabilities that I couldn't see or wasn't aware of.
Right.
Because obviously not every disability is visible and not everybody talks about all their disabilities. And so I'm very much aware that I could have been around disabled people and had no idea. But to my knowledge, it wasn't something that I had a lot of exposure to. And I didn't know it was something that I would feel so passionate about. I didn't even know about all of the injustices and ableism that exists in our society. And so it's really just torn a curtain down. And I have a look behind the curtain now. And what you see behind the curtain is not
It's not pretty all the time. Nope.
Whenever you've seen that and you've seen those injustices and you've seen that ableism, for me personally, it's like, what can I do other than take up arms and say, this is important to me now. I'm an advocate for this now, and I always say that, people are like, oh, you're such a good advocate. I'm like, when you have a child like mine, I don't know how you cannot be, because she wouldn't be here without advocacy. So, her being here didn't just happen accidentally. People had to advocate for kids like her being here. And so I'm going to keep doing that so that more kids like her can be here, and not just be here, but thrive here. Not just surviving, but thriving and experiencing a full, joyous, fun, adventurous life.
I love that. And I'm grateful for your energy, your advocacy, and honestly, just for being exactly who you are as Sage's mom. And I want to know how our listeners can connect with you. And y'all, if you DM her, she may or may not get back to you, and that is okay. It is not a reflection of how much she cares about you or your child, but I think we could all give ourselves that grace. So with that caveat, how can people learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram. That's my most used platform, and that's my full name. It's at Emma Kate Springer. I don't really go by Emma Kate in my life, but Emma Springer was taken, so it's Emma Kate Springer. And that is pretty much all my kids. You won't see much of me. It's going to be mostly my kids, Sage and her story.
Well, when they're that so cute, I get it.
Yes. And then also you can find the nonprofit that I am the executive director of, and that is at Springer Family Foundation. And we are in the process of rebranding that and relaunching it, because we are expanding our mission and we are changing the name and our branding and everything. So if you find Springer Family Foundation is no longer existing, find my personal Instagram and you will find the way to our new organization. Or you might see, if you go ahead and follow Springer Family Foundation over the next couple of months, that is transitioning to something else. And I don't want to give too many spoilers about that. But basically what we do at Springer Family Foundation is we empower and encourage families of kids with or not just kids, but people with trisomy 18 and 13, because they kind of get lumped together a lot, through education about different medical needs and complexities. And we provide resources as far as where they can get medical care and good doctors and all of those things, as well as financial assistance in order to get there for cost of gas, food, lodging, things like that, in order to travel for fair care. And we are expanding our mission as well into financial assistance for any cost related to a person with trisomy 13 or 18 living their happiest, healthiest lives. So that includes adaptive aids, minor home modifications, intensive therapies, all sorts of things like that. And so that is a big part of our relaunching, is to do more for people that are raising or in the family of a person surviving and thriving with trisomy 18 and 13, because there are more and more of them and nobody's really serving them right now. So that's a big, long soapbox to say you can find me on Instagram.
Yeah. Well, you're what I call a gap filler. And a gap filler is somebody who saw a gap or felt a gap themselves and found a way to fill it. And so our followers, our listeners at Child Life on Call are both parents and healthcare professionals. And I know that we will be very supportive of your mission. So please just know that we're here and we're supporting you and Sage and your whole family and all the other families that you support from here on out. So just count us as friends, okay?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you so much for giving so much of yourself, your time, your story today. I have no doubt that you are going to help another family who's going through a lot of the same challenges of trying to navigate standing up for something that hasn't been done before. So I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me and getting me a platform to talk about these things and, getting all this information onto new ears, because the more people that hear about it are the more people that will care about it. So
thank you so much for joining us on the Child Life On Call podcast. The only reason this podcast keeps on going is because of you and listeners like you. So please join in on the conversation with us on Instagram, Facebook. I'm even on TikTok now, y'all, making a fool of myself. I haven't danced yet, but maybe it's coming. You can find us at Child Life on Call. We also have a website, and that has all of our information about the Child Life Circle, about the Child Life on Call app, and a blog with new information all the time. That's childlifeoncall.com. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for listening to these episodes and being a part of this community. We are so grateful and so honored to be able to provide this for you.